Hello and welcome to Autistic FM. My name is Haje. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm your host on this journey. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find the transcripts and additional information about each episode on autistic.fm. In this episode, I'm joined by Cher, a passionate advocate navigating life alongside her husband Darren, who was diagnosed with autism just a couple of years ago, after 25 years of them being married. She shares her journey of understanding, love, and adapting, offering a raw and heartfelt perspective on neurodiverse relationships. From the challenges of miscommunication to the joy of deep connection, Cher opens up about what it takes to truly show up for someone while also caring for yourself. Our conversation dives into the nuances of late diagnoses, sensory sensitivities, and how understanding autism has transformed her marriage. Cher also talks about her TikTok project, Navigating Neurospicy Love, where she shares lessons and insights to support others in similar relationships. Together, we explore how patience, curiosity, and communication can foster growth, even in the face of the unknown. Sounds like fun, right? I thought so too. Let's roll the tape and find out. Hello, dear guest. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. It's quite an honor.
Would you start by telling me your name and your pronouns, please?
Thanks. My name is Cher, and my pronouns are she and her.
Where in the world are you?
I'm in Madison, Wisconsin.
So we met via TikTok, and TikTok has served me a bunch of your content, and I'm just delighted to get to actually communicate with you directly. Before we started recording, you noted, hey, I kind of feel like we know each other, which is funny because we've never spoken. What is your connection with neurodivergence?
Yeah, thank you. My connection with neurodivergence is I'm married to a late diagnosed autistic and ADHD man. Also, I've got some other neurodivergence running through my family. Most notably, I was raised by a undiagnosed but pretty prevalent ADHD parent.
It sounds like you guys have been together a while, but that the diagnosis is a newer thing. Is that right?
Yes. So we have been married for 27 years. And only a couple of years ago, my husband, his name is Darren, he was diagnosed. He sought an official diagnosis of autism. And that was, we had been married for 25 years. And so it was quite a ways in.
And was that a surprise to you at all?
That is a great question. Looking back, it should not have been, but we started dating in 1994. This really dates me, and back in '94, all we had was Rain Man, the movie Rain Man. And if you are not familiar with that movie, it's with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, and it's fantastic. And it is a portrayal of a much more severe case of autism. Now, autism has been around and it has been recognized for many years, but it wasn't really talked about until early 90s, mid 90s. And so we missed anything being diagnosed or recognized prevalently in school. And also he's from Canada, and so I don't think it's a lot different there it was at the time in terms of how it was recognized, but he completely flew under the radar, and so we just didn't know what we didn't know.
You immediately laughed when I asked you the question. I'm curious what happened for you in that moment? What I asked you was it a surprise to you?
Yes, and that does make me laugh. Yes. So, looking back, hindsight is 20/20, and especially in this case, and there were so many things. If I knew then what I know now, it should have been very, very clear, and it just wasn't. I didn't recognize it. I knew my boyfriend at the time was quirky. I knew my husband all these years was quirky, but I didn't know that there was actually a diagnosis or a label that went with that. Some of the early things, like, for example, when I met him, he had aluminum foil on his windows, and he had beautifully huge windows in his apartment building, and they all had aluminum foil on it. So things like that where I was like, that's different. Okay, and a lot of it, and his mixing bowls were cereal bowls, and there were things like that where I thought, well, we're grad students and we don't have a lot of money for things like drapes or blinds or even bowls. And so I didn't think a lot of it. And then also, I mentioned he's from Canada, so I didn't know. We didn't have the internet back then, right? And so,
do they have curtains in Canada? I don't know. This makes sense.
Yeah. So I didn't know. I'd only been to Canada once, and I was a kid, so I was like, I chalked a lot of it up to being young and with no money, and maybe there was a slight cultural difference in some of these things.
Yeah, totally.
Now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so clear now.
And so you run a TikTok called
Navigating Neurospicy Love.
And so obviously you are in a journey of navigating Neurospicy love. Mm-hmm. And when I first saw the channel, I was like, there has got to be a story here.
Even though we are at the end of 2024, I still think there's not a lot that is known about autism among mainstream neurotypicals. I have a couple of friends who have kids on the spectrum, and even then, it wasn't really talked about a lot. And what I knew about autism goes way back to that movie that I had mentioned. And then also, there's been other shows. Another show that comes to mind is Loving on the Spectrum. It's for adult roommates who are navigating love, and those folks are a little bit more severe too, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been quite a while since I've seen it, and so when my husband was diagnosed, he dove into books. Like, I think he gathered like 8 different books, maybe more, and he dove right in, which is very, typical of, an autistic person. Is he dove in and he studied it and he understood everything, and there are other resources online and digital and and all sorts of different resources, and as I looked around, there wasn't anything for somebody who loves somebody on the spectrum or who loves somebody who's neurodivergent. And he was all gung-ho, and he was learning about it. He was like, at one point he said to me, "The mask is coming off." And I was like, "Whoa, that is great for you, but what do you mean?" I just didn't know. I didn't know what any of this meant. And then, as I continued to look around for some sort of support, I went to TikTok, and I found a couple of pages on TikTok, and one of them, it's a man and a woman, and the woman I think actually is ADHD, and I found it to be insensitive. I found, like, literally he's laughing at her, and she's there, so she's a part of it, but I thought, dude, your marriage is not going to last very long, because it just seemed so tone deaf, and I thought, well, this isn't great, and as I looked around for more information, I found some therapists, some clinicians, doing some things, and I've learned a lot from that. And certainly the folks with autism, their pages are fantastic. Like, I'm learning a lot, but still there wasn't support for somebody like myself who is loving a neurospicy individual. So that's why I laugh, because it has been a journey, and every day I'm learning.
Were there things that had kind of been irking or confusing you about your relationship that just kind of snapped into place when there was a diagnosis and you went, oh, it all makes sense now?
Yeah. How much time do you have now?
We've got an hour. You can keep going as long as you like.
So many things. There were some things, like, before we knew about this diagnosis, it almost did us in several times, and that's because there was a lack of understanding, mostly on my part. There were times that I thought for sure he didn't love me. He had a very, very tough time locking doors and shutting doors, and I took that as you don't love me. Like, if you're gonna leave me in a home or an apartment or whatever it was at the time, and you're not even going to latch the door, clearly you don't love me, And so, that went on and on and on. I mean, it was many, many times, and I tried so many different things to get him to see that this is really important to me. And that goes back into some of my own trauma of not feeling safe as a child. And I explained that to him. I'm like, I have got to feel safe, and this is basic. And it doesn't seem like you as a guy have that sense of wanting to keep your partner safe. And then when we had kids, I thought, well, surely he'll lock the doors when we had kids, and it still wasn't happening. And now I know that it wasn't because he didn't love me or us. There was something really going on there. Now, we can really resolve that with technology, right? Just, latching the door and turning the switch or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think you just mentioned something really important, which is a lot of the time when things are challenging, the overlap between trauma and the things that get touched by what somebody else does. The phrase I've heard that really kind of rings true for me is like, hey, this is a level 3 mistake and I'm getting a level 11 response. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting, especially if your traumas are triggered by the other person and vice versa in the same interaction. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a recipe for disaster, right? Yeah. And it seems to be incredibly common in a neurotypical person dating a neurospicy person. Mm-hmm. And I think you've just given a really good example of that. Like whether or not the door is latched, who cares? But to you, like, hey, I care. I'm that person who cares, right?
In two neurotypical folks marrying, there's a 40 to 50% chance of divorce. But when you have neurotypical and neurodivergent, there's 85% chance of divorce. That is mind-blowing to me. And really it comes down to the communication, right? And it comes down to when are we compiling previous traumas on top of the neurodivergence, and then also the communication issues. You can see why it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's a specific layer of challenge that comes along with particularly being a late diagnosed autistic person. Because the thing is, the fact that I was able to mask for so long and essentially was more or less undetected, like people realized I was weird, but that doesn't mean you're diagnosably weird, right? When your husband said, the mask is gone, and you're like, whoa, pump the brakes, what's this?
Yeah, and okay, so from a neurotypical partner's point of view, when he said that, first of all, I didn't know what it meant. Second of all, I will say that as I'm learning more about this, neurotypicals feel like, or at least this neurotypical does, everybody has to mask at some point, right? Like you can't just go to a meeting and be yourself completely, or you wouldn't, a neurotypical wouldn't have their job either. But what neurotypicals don't understand, and what I am learning to understand is, and what you're saying is, having to mask it's your whole being. Like you're masking your whole self, where a neurotypical will mask, and using in meeting an example. So, for women, we'll do her hair and put her makeup on and dress a certain way and act a certain way, but we're just modifying a little bit, right? Like we're not changing our whole being or masking stims or that sort of thing. And so there's some real differences there that I really am hoping to get neurotypical folks to understand better about what neurodivergent folks are dealing with.
Has anything changed in your relationship?
Everything. Yeah, everything has changed. So I think we're learning and growing together. Granted, he's much further along in this process. And also, even though he officially was diagnosed only 2 years ago, like there was time leading up to this where he was like, I wonder, because there was something that prompted him to get diagnosed, right? Like he was sort of, seeing things and understanding things and reflecting on things. And so he's way ahead of me. But there are things that we're still learning together. Like even just yesterday, I don't even remember what he said, but he said something, and I said, that was autism. And he's like, yeah, it was. Like, and so it was both of us going, wow, that was quite autism, and it's said in a gentle and a kind way, from me to him, and sometimes from him as well, as we navigate this together and understand. And where before, like if he would do a deep dive on some conversation or something that he's had where he's talking about, 85% more details than I needed or anybody needed in a conversation. And previously I'd be like, oh my gosh, I do not need all this information. Well, now I know that this is part of his processing. And so everything has changed. This diagnosis has changed everything in the way that we relate to each other, we understand each other. I'm kinder, where I would tease him about things before. And again, not necessarily being mean, but I'm much kinder about it now. Like I don't tease him about a lot of things now, and at first he was like, okay, so in the past you would tease me about that. How come you're not doing that? And I said, well, because now that I understand that you're actually autistic, hashtag actually autistic, I don't think that's nice of me to tease you about anymore. And he's like, oh, so we're both learning things.
And sometimes that misfires, or sometimes it goes wrong, or sometimes I say something that pops into my head that turns out to land terribly. And I think the truth is that happens more with people I feel safer with because I unmask more, right?
Like interesting.
I always have this filter running. Like my mom's kind of refrain for me was always like, don't you ever think before you speak? And I was like, no, actually I don't. Should I? And so I started, but that also means that when there's a conversation happening rapid fire, I either am running on a script or I run a filter. So like if it's oh, how's the weather, blah, 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 that one I can do because I've figured out the script for that. But if it's a conversation that is like this one, in fact, that is genuine and real time, I'm like, okay, is that an inappropriate thing to say or is it not? Well, I think it's okay here. And then I say the thing, right? But so there's this delay built into my brain now where, and that is filtering, that is masking. And I think, as you mentioned, right, neurotypical people do this. Like, if you normally swear a lot and you walk into a business meeting, maybe you turn off the swears, right? That is, if you genuinely swear like a trooper and you don't do that in meetings, that is a mask. That is a totally understandable mask. And as you also pointed out, I think the difference is if I am really hurt by the brightness of the lights, do I say something in a meeting? Do I not? Do I position myself so the light isn't in my eyes? Like recording these podcasts, I have two very large lights, one there, one there. So I look good on camera. But this is exhausting to me. And I'm like, well, that kind of thing, right? So you mentioned that everything changed. And I thought that was really interesting. Do you feel like you have husband version 2.0 now? Is it that drastic of a change that it's like, oh, actually, this is kind of a different person?
That's a great question. At first, when he was diagnosed and I was just starting to think about this, but not think about it, I was a little avoidant, as I mentioned earlier. I kind of felt like it was a bait and switch. He is not the man that I thought I married, and here's how. The guy that I married, I met in grad school, and he was boisterous and social and fun and really outgoing, and I am more introverted, and so I really admired that in him. And then now I come to find out that was all masking, and so I have had to come to terms with that. Is this is kind of a husband 2.0. And that guy that I thought I had married does not actually exist. He can pretend that exists, but it actually doesn't. But is that why? Is that the only reason why I married him? No. So portions are husband 2.0. Yeah.
Was there a risk at any point that was the end of the two of you?
Yeah, we have had several times during our relationship that I thought that was the end. And most of it was before he was diagnosed, because there were things that that we just, that like communication issues that we could not get past, or I would feel completely unloved, over something, and I thought this, and in fact, at one point in time, I thought, because there were major communication issues with this birth family, and I thought, we can start over. We're at the time we were young enough. We can start over and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And I'm really glad that we worked through it. But yeah, it's been incredibly challenging.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And so what do you do now when you're like, hey, I'm noticing there's a communication challenge, or there's something that, like, I want to communicate but it's not coming through, or he seems to be trying to say something and I'm not getting it. Like, have you guys developed a toolkit or a framework or some way to help with that?
We have, and of course it's evolving. And you had said something earlier about you do not like to be, what did you say?
Pathologized.
Yep.
Like made to feel sick, basically.
Yep. And you actually, by saying that, made me realize that is what I'm doing. I didn't even realize that. Like, that's how new I am to this. And so I think what is happening now is, when I say that's autism, for example, or he says it, I think we're still identifying it almost like we're in elementary school, or even before that, like we're trying to figure out what's happening, what's going on. And I imagine that will become less and less where we don't do it at all anymore. And again, it's only to each other, never in public. So that's one thing where we're just naming some things that are happening. And then also, one thing that really I struggled with throughout a lot of our relationship, I think it started occurring more later in more recent years, but if we would have a heated conversation over something, and I would be sharing my thoughts and issues with him, and he would, and I didn't realize this, but he'd shut down and he would just blink. And I was like, what is the blinking? Like, what is happening with the blinking? And then he couldn't say anything. And to what you were saying is, you have scripts for different things. Well, he would later tell me that what he would do is he would have a script for many, many things, and he would study books, he would study movies, he would study just typical interactions, and have all of these scripts in his head. And when I would bring something up for which he did not have an existing script for, he would blink, and that was him processing. Well, now actually we haven't had as many of those situations, because now I understand so much more. Like if there's something that's happening, I can identify, I can say to him, autism, and he'll say yes or no, or this is what's going on. It's kind of our shorthand right now. But I also know that if he does start blinking, that's when I just back up. And he knows that I know that I'm just backing up, and literally I'll go into another room and I'll just give him time. And that's huge. I mean, that's a huge way that we are moving forward and dealing with some of the communication issues.
Yeah, I love that. I don't go nonverbal very often, but when I do, like, with my partner, we basically, like, we had a conversation about it. It's like, hey, this only happens at the worst possible time. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't lose my ability to speak when we're watching TV, or when like, it's only when there's like an emotionally heightened thing where the next thing out of my mouth could have a huge impact, and I don't know what to say, and I don't want to make things worse, but you are desperate to hear some sort of affirmation from me. I just hold up a finger, or I hold two fingers in front of my mouth. It's like, hey, I don't have words right now. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's a sign to her to, hey, you need to look after yourself for a moment, because I'm not present to be able to say anything or do anything that is helpful. Mm-hmm. And that's been really powerful when she is able to, oh, yeah, I need to figure this out by myself for now. And then we can circle around, and like with a little bit of thought, I'm able to speak what I need to speak. But I think this is where sometimes I just feel like a bag of symptoms zipped into a human body, honestly. Because it's like, I was bullied a lot, and the bullying came from being autistic and stimming or moving. And what I realized recently is that, like, I don't dance. And the reason I don't dance is that dancing is expression emotion to music. Well, for me, expressing emotion through my body is unsafe because that's what I get bullied for. And so I have all this like stuff that is kind of layered on top of each other that is completely invisible to anybody around me, right? But starting to communicate some of that to my partner and to my closest friends has been fucking scary. Because I'm like, oh, I'm letting, like, this is stuff I'm ashamed of. This is stuff I have, like, oh, I'm not running the right human operating system, like, voice in the back of my head. And so every opportunity my partner has had to show up for that, she has.
That's amazing.
And I'm seeing you and your partner, well, I don't see your partner, but I see you show up for your partner in a similar way, and it is so beautiful. It takes so much trust and faith and patience and love. And you're showing all of that. And I mean, that's how relationships survive, right? And how they continue to evolve.
Yeah, and thank you for all of that. And it sounds like you're doing exactly what you need to do, and you're explaining to her. You're putting words behind what is happening with you. And from my perspective as a partner of somebody going through that, that's what I needed. And now that I have that, it makes all the difference in the world. So that's great that you guys are there.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, the reason I'm doing this podcast is that I want to write a book. The working title for this book is the Care and Feeding for My Pet Autist. It's kind of tongue in cheek. But at the same time, I'm like, I started writing this book for my partner. And then I realized I don't love doing stuff that don't scale, right? I can write this book for her, and I'm working on it. Don't tell her. But I want this to be helpful for more people than just me, right? I've written a bunch of books before. In fact, the whole shelf behind me is all of these books are books I've written. But like, I realized I can't write this book based on just my experience, because if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? Or rather, if you met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And I feel like there's some learning that needs to happen, and I need to do that learning with other people, and hence having all these conversations. And like, you've already shared a bunch of stuff where I'm like, oh, that isn't my experience, but that is many people's experience. And so I want to include that in the book and include that on the podcast so people can learn from each other. I think that's super powerful.
Yeah, that is so great. And I love that you're writing that book. That's the exact kind of book that I was looking for when my life was turned upside down and shaken. And there's so many things that mainstream neurotypicals don't get about autism, and that is, I think that's slowly changing. Although now my view is warped because now I'm doing a deep dive. But for example, on the spectrum, I know for a fact that some of my friends, and so these are well-educated women in their 40s and 50s, they believe that being on the spectrum is basically it's kind of like a timeline of less severe to more severe autistic traits, rather than, and my husband actually just explained this to me the other day, that it's not that. I mean, I knew that it wasn't that, but I couldn't quite understand well what it was. And he said the spectrum, and he said that it's kind of like, and he's in a band, and so he's like, he goes, I think of it as a soundboard or an audio board, right, where there's all these different levers, and they're all at different places for the perfect sound. And so, relating it to a person, everyone's got their different levels and their different, switches at different things, and that is their experience as an autistic person. And I've also heard it described as, so I was talking with my therapist about this, and she actually is really supportive of what I'm trying to do with my TikTok page, in that she, even as a therapist, and she doesn't specialize in autism, but she has colleagues who are autistic and who also specialize in autism. And there aren't a lot of, that she knows of either, a lot of resources for folks who are in relationships with folks on the spectrum. And she explained she had actually didn't quite understand the whole, what the spectrum was either. But then as we were talking about it, she likened it to that of a thumbprint, where everybody's experience is unique and different. And I love that. And typical neurotypicals, is there such a thing? Yes. They don't understand it. They don't get it. There's so much to be learned.
Yeah. I mean, the sliders on a soundboard is how I usually describe it too. And,
Okay.
I don't, and the interesting thing to keep in mind is that the slider goes, like, for a neurotypical person, a well-adjusted neurotypical person, all the sliders are at 0, right? But the sliders go up and down. So my sensitivity to light might be much higher than someone or much lower. My sensitivity to pain may be much higher or much lower. And so I feel like I'm roughly a 0 for food. But there are people who are like a -10. And in order to have a food experience, they have to eat incredibly spicy food or incredibly whatever. And so you get sensation-seeking behavior, which is also an autism thing, or sensation avoidance. So you might either eat super, super spicy or super bland. Or for music, for example, for sound, some people like to be in complete silence, or some people love going to heavy metal shows, because the absolute overload of sound and music is what makes their brain go, ah.
Yeah.
And just that little nuance is important to understand. And I think the other nuance that's helpful to know is that soundboard is going to be different every day. Can change minute by minute, right? If I'm poorly slept, I cannot deal with noise. I cannot deal with much light. If I'm well slept, I'm like, yeah. Like, I notice that it's like, it's never pleasant to be in super bright places, but I don't hate it.
That's really interesting. And it makes so much sense. And I think that the more we talk about these things, the more that it's going to catch on with folks, with everybody. There's so much to learn. And also what we know to be true today, maybe didn't exist, or we didn't know to be true yesterday. And also, to be fun to listen to this podcast a couple of years from now, because I bet so much will have changed even then, because of the research and the knowledge. And, there's so much changing on the clinical side of things. And so hopefully, I think you got to publish this book pretty quickly, because maybe someday it'll be moot, right? No, I think we'll probably always.
I hope so.
But yeah,
I would love to not have to write this thing, right?
Yeah.
I love writing. Don't get me wrong; it's definitely one of my special interests. But this is it's turning out to be a really hard book to write, because it's making me go deep into the shit I've put on the shelf. I'm like, I don't ever want to look at this. I'm like, oh, now I'm writing a book about it. Fine, right? And it's actually been, for some of the chapters I'm working on, I've had a lot of false starts, because whenever I look at it, I have this realization, like, oh, this thing in my childhood, it now makes sense to me, but now I need to sit with it. I need to talk to a therapist about it. I need to process this with friends or with my partner, and then I can write this chapter. And the truth is, this comes up for almost everything I'm looking at. Like, every direction I look, I have new realizations, like, oh yeah, that thing that never makes sense to me as a kid now makes sense. And it's always like, oh yeah, that's autism. But it is exhausting to start unmasking. Like, when I first realized, I went back to some of the most traumatic stuff I've ever experienced, and suddenly everything made sense.
Wow.
And that is beautiful, but it's also exhausting.
Yeah. You'll come out of this on the other side. Just think how changed you'll be, for the better. I mean, it's really powerful, this journey that you're on. And also talking with all of these different kinds of people from different backgrounds. And it's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm loving it. Would you tell me some stuff you've learned along the way? Like, some surprises you've seen, some techniques you've picked up, how are you able to love your husband better than before now?
I'm able to love my husband better than I was before. It really goes back to just understanding where he's coming from, and each day I try to set a little bit of time aside to to do some reading, or to watch some TikTok videos, or to talk to somebody in the know about autism, and I'll come to him with different things that I learn, and I like to think that it's helping us grow together and helping us understand each other better. And also, the biggest thing that I have learned is patience. In addition to understanding, and in addition to open communication, I'm patient. Much more patient than I was before. And there's a lot of talk about whether to get diagnosed officially or not, and I think self-diagnosis is huge. And for us, the official diagnosis, it really was a game changer. Would we still be married now? Probably. I mean, we've been in it for this long, but I think that it has made everything so much clearer, and really has helped to know officially where we stand and what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting about getting diagnosed or being self-diagnosed. And what I keep saying to people is if the treatment works, it doesn't really matter what the illness is. Or, if the tools work, it doesn't really matter why they work. Mm-hmm. Right? It's one of those things. I have a neurotypical friend who has her wall covered in Post-its. And typically that would, for me, say, oh, ADHD, right?
Yeah.
But she's not Neurospicy. But this is her toolkit for remembering to do tasks and all that kind of stuff, and to prioritize and to move things around and to know what to do in a day or whatever. She's like, it works better this way than in my head. I was like, you know what? That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a tool I would recommend to somebody who is diagnosed ADHD, but even without a diagnosis, if the tool works, great.
Yeah.
Right?
There are different things that now I'm much more understanding about, he's very, very sensitive to light, and his sleep is very impacted by everything. And so over the years, I've been very frustrated at times about that. And in fact, he's been called, by some friends, Princess and the Pea, because everything has to be just perfect in order for him to have a decent night's sleep. And then sometimes still he won't have a decent night's sleep. And so I like to have, using some specific examples, I like to have some nightlights here and there. And he wants it to be pitch black. Well, then what we I've learned that it can be, it's gotten darker and darker over the years, and that's fine. But also, if there's a nightlight, he insists, and I have come to be okay with it being the red light, right? That is less likely to disrupt your whatever. And different things, like he has had to, would need a new pillow every 6 months. And to me, that's a waste of money. I'm like, the pillow is still decent after 6 months. Well, we found a pillow from Sleep Number, no affiliation, and that has lasted a lot longer. And so there's things that we've worked through together. And also, now that the kids are out of the house, we can sleep in separate beds, where he can do whatever he wants. He can have it be pitch black. He likes it really, really cold. I run cold, so I like it warmer. We can, it makes it a lot easier. And at the same time, I am much more understanding about what he does need for when, we are sleeping in the same room, or when we're traveling. It just helps to know, right? It helps to know what we're working with.
The first time I ever lived with somebody and moved in with her, she actually had 2 bedrooms. She had the master bedroom and then a guest room. And a lot of the time I would sleep in the guest room. And today I have real regrets about never having a conversation with her about that. We'd go to bed together, and when she would fall asleep, I would sneak off to the guest room and sleep there. And I have no idea what she thought about that or what story she had, or if any. Maybe she just realized, actually, I sleep better by myself. You sleep better by yourself. Great, this
Uh-huh.
works, right?
Yeah.
But these days, I'm like, that's. And I'm actually like your husband in that I like to have it pitch dark. I like to have it completely quiet. And I like to have it very cold. Some of those things you can compromise on, like you can use a red light instead of a white light, or whatever. But temperature is hard to compromise on, right? It's like the temperature of the room is the temperature of the room. You can't blast the AC in one corner and light a fire in the other corner. That doesn't really work.
It comes to communication, and it sounds like back then you didn't know either, what you were working with either, and I think that while that's not necessary, it is helpful. It's another tool. Like you had referenced earlier, it's helpful to know some of these things. To figure out how you can move forward together. There's so many things that now I understand. Like you had mentioned dancing before too. We had taken ballroom dancing a few times over the years, and I always thought that would be fun, and he was okay with it. And what I found annoying was that when he was dancing, it would almost look like he was looking through me, and I'm like, what is happening? Well, now I know that's him processing, and that's him thinking about his steps. He didn't need to look at his feet, but he also needed to sort of space out, but it was looking at me, but spacing out, which before I knew, it was disconcerting, where I was like, what? Why do you do this? What is happening? So now understanding, it's great. It's a game changer.
Yeah, for sure. What other things have you learned?
I think the first time I heard this was on your podcast, and you just said it earlier, is when you know one autistic person, you know one autistic person. And I think that mainstream neurotypicals don't get that. They don't understand. And again, like especially those of us at a certain age know Rain Man, or some of the more extreme versions, and that is just one example. Although I will say that is an example that is most often portrayed in the media from what I've seen, and I think it's probably the most easiest to portray. We are watching Atypical now. Are you familiar with that show?
Yeah.
Okay, and I think we're behind. We just discovered it. We're maybe on episode 4, but it's been around for, is it a few years? Do you know?
Yeah, I haven't actually seen it myself.
Okay.
You mentioned Love on the Spectrum earlier too. I am aware it exists, and I should watch it for research, but I also have this incredibly visceral reaction. Like, I used to be a TV producer. I know how TV is made.
Yeah.
And why some things get included or not. Even just knowing that it's a cost show gives me an extremely negative reaction to it. And I hear people say sweet things about it and that it's done well, but I'm also like, oh, this is entertainment. I feel very uncomfortable about that. Anyway, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, so Love on the Spectrum, I sort of felt the same way, where I felt a little uncomfortable, and we only watched a couple of those episodes, but we're working our way through Atypical now, and it's interesting because we'll talk after the show, and after the first couple, I could tell my husband was uncomfortable about some of the topics, and then I said, like, the next night we were going to go and sit down and watch TV, and I had suggested something else, and he said, well, no, we can watch Atypical. And I said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. And he's like, no, actually, it's okay. And we had some words, the day before, and he's like, no, that was not related to that at all. I thought maybe he was uncomfortable about something, and that it was a result of the show, and let's not watch it then. That is totally fine. There are so many shows to watch that are great. And what he did say is that about the actor who portrays the main character, I think his name is Sam, I don't remember for sure. He's really good, and I haven't dug into who he is, or I'd love to know how he did his research, because he's really good, and he is more extreme. not terribly, it's not like Rain Man, but he's a little more extreme. And again, that's easier to portray, but some of the themes in it are great. He's trying to find a girlfriend, trying to find love, and then this also what strikes me too is because he was diagnosed as a younger person. He has all of the support, like he's got the therapist, he's got the mom who has been his person and his fighter ever since he was an itty bitty guy. He's got a sister who has also been there for him, and their relationship is fantastic. And so it's really interesting to see. And so I think that more shows that are out there that maybe can pull mainstream in, and also can be real enough, because you said it's casted, that can be real enough. It also helps, just people understand, what some of the experiences are. Of course, it's fiction, like it's not reality, but I think some of that can help.
The way I often put it to friends is like, I would love to live in a world where TV shows can have a character in a wheelchair where the wheelchair never becomes a plot point. Mm-hmm. Or a gay character where them being gay, whatever, they just date whoever they want. There's never a plot element, right? And I think we haven't quite gotten there with neurodivergent yet, where you just have an autistic person and the autism isn't a plot point. They're just autistic. Mm-hmm. Until I was watching Gilmore Girls. Okay. And I was watching that show, and there's a character in there called Jason who becomes a love interest at some point. And we looked at each other, like, hey, this person is totally autistic coded for a number of reasons. And it's done very subtly. Like, if you don't, he's just a little quirky, he's just a little weird. But no, that's definitely low support need autism. Mm-hmm. And noticing that in some other shows too, it's like, I feel like that is incredibly empowering. It's like, hey, there's something about this character that is a little off. Mm-hmm. Like, oh no, that's just, they're uncomfortable to watch because they're a lot like me. Which is like, oh.
Yeah. And, actually, on TV, there just was Napoleon Dynamite. And I saw it the first time when it was new, and everyone, people loved it. Well, people either loved it or hate it, but I found mostly people were loving it, the people that I was talking to and around, and I loved it. And then watching it now, I was like, oh, now I don't know if I'm so cool with this show, this movie,
I hated it with a passion of 1,000 suns, because everything he did, I was like, oh God, this is... Yeah, and now I know why. Yeah. But that show made me incredibly uncomfortable. And somebody said, well, it's just because he's too much like you. I was like, yeah, that's true. But also, we need to talk about why that is problematic. But also, like for all the people who love Napoleon Dynamite, there is something there, right? There's a... Yeah, maybe that is... Maybe me saying I wish there were characters that where that isn't the main plot point, maybe I'm getting what I ask for and I don't like it. So that's also entirely possible. Careful what you wish for, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that, and it's interesting, too, to have seen Napoleon Dynamite, not understanding and really understanding autism, and then now seeing it from a totally different lens. It's interesting, where I think maybe the shows like Atypical, using that as an example, where it is you go into it knowing it's a show about a teenager with autism, and for the mainstream folks who are going to be watching that, hopefully they'll learn some things, things like his monotone voice doesn't necessarily mean that he's not feeling things. It's just how he communicates. And also the eye contact. He does a great job with not making eye contact usually. He will for some points, but also hopefully that helps somebody who's viewing it understand that it's not because he's not invested. It's just how he's processing. I would say that the biggest example is the dancing example. What I would say is I learned years ago that, this is actually more my eye contact. If I was presenting a new idea to him that I knew wasn't going to fly, I knew to not look at him because he did not mask his facial expressions around me. And so I would not look at him. And, until later when I knew that he had time to process it. And then when we had kids, and they would say, oh, Dad's really mad about this. And I'm like, you know what? Just don't look at him when he's reacting that way. And then, just not for a little while. And so it's almost like the reverse eye contact, and then what my kids have pointed out is when he is communicating, he makes really concerted eye contact where he's not blinking, and that can be disconcerting. And it doesn't impact me as much as his partner, and I don't know why that is. Maybe I expect him to make eye contact with me. It hasn't really been as much of an issue with me, but I know it has been with my kids and with other people. So yeah, eye contact is a continual source of interest and intrigue, in terms of a conversation piece.
Yeah, for sure. I can't remember when this was. I must have been about 10 or 11. Somebody said, hey, instead of having to worry about which eye to look into, just look at the bridge of their nose and count to 8, and then look away briefly and look back, count to 8. So I find myself counting 1, 2, and then look around a little bit and then look back. And I don't know where this came from, whether this was in a book or somebody told me. What I learned was that when I was having conversations with people, the conversations went much better by looking at the bridge of their nose for 8 seconds, then looking away. And so I taught myself what natural eye contact is. But for me, and even now, especially when I'm unmasked, it's super hard. It's super, super hard because I'm trying to read their face expression. And if I'm trying to explain something that maybe they don't want to hear, as soon as I see micro expressions of disgust or of whatever, I clam up. I'm not able to finish my conversation, finish my statement. And so it's really important for me to look away so I can actually just say what I need to say, and then I can look over. And if then they're crying, well, that sucks. But that's not like disconnecting the caretaking from taking care of someone has been an incredibly interesting journey that I'm still on. I'm still really trying to figure out how to navigate that.
And it sounds like that will be something that is just maybe always evolving, and I think that looking and then looking away for a certain amount of time, like if you're talking, even if you're listening, that is requiring your brain to do a lot of different things, so if you think about it. So the fact that you've been able to adopt that is really incredible.
Well, so this is the thing. I'm very, very smart. And when I caught COVID and I had brain fog, my entire mask, my ability to mask went away for a few weeks. And those were easily the hardest weeks of my life. Because I wasn't able to function. I wasn't able to leave the house. I wasn't able to go to a barber or go to a shop or I was basically locked in the house because I was I don't know what to do right now. I was able to use my phone, and luckily grocery delivery exists, right? So, but I was I can't buy alcohol because that means I have to show my ID, drop it on my doorstep, and take a picture of it, and whatever. I cannot interact with anybody right now because all my scripts were gone, all my ability to, I was terrified the whole time. And then when slowly my brain function came back, and I was oh, I am running on pure processing power, and that's why I'm able to mask so well. But when the processing power goes away, and so I had a moment of what happens if I get old and I get dementia? And that power goes away. And I had this real existential crisis around hey, I need to be better with who I am unmasked. Because at some point, I cannot rely on my brain functioning this well my whole life. That was a real scary and humbling moment.
And to think about that, my mom was diagnosed with autism officially in April, and so we're dealing with a lot of that, and it does magnify your true self. Where I had mentioned that she's ADHD, and it's off the charts now, where she had to be doing a lot of masking, either knowingly or unknowingly, throughout her whole life, and it does get magnified. And it just is. I think that for folks who have dementia, I think there's better support where she's at a memory care facility, and they get them. They understand what these folks are going through and where they're at, and you just hope that your loved ones, especially hopefully then, there will be better tools and ways to deal with it, and maybe even ways to not have it happen. But I think we're making strides in the right direction for all of these things. When my husband got his official diagnosis and he started telling some of our friends, and one group of friends that he told, we had a gathering, and as we were all walking outside, one of the wives, a friend of mine, she held back, and she walked out with me and said one-on-one, and how are you doing with Darren's diagnosis? And it was the first time somebody had asked me that, how I was doing. It was all about Darren, and yes, that's a lot, that he was going through for sure, but nobody had asked me. And in fact, to this day, she's the only one who has asked me how I was doing with his diagnosis. So that really, it made me want to cry. Like, it really made me feel seen and loved.
Hey, Cher, how are you doing with Darren's diagnosis?
You're the second one. Whoop, whoop. This whole talk has really, it makes me feel seen and loved, right? Like it's good to talk about these things, and especially with somebody who's also going through it and has the same vision and hopes and dreams. It's great. It's great to be talking through these things, and I hope you feel seen and loved as well. Like it's really it's sort of therapeutic.
I noticed you didn't ask her the question though.
That was an answer.
Was that the answer? No, but how are you doing? Like how is it all landing on you? How are you feeling?
It's there are good days and there are days that aren't as great. Today's a good day, and we just had family home for Thanksgiving, and that was great. And our kids are super supportive of the whole situation, and so that's really helpful. But on days where it's in the middle of January in Wisconsin, and we're feeling like that right now, and I don't have family around, or much interaction with friendly folks. Those days are harder, and on those days I will continue learning about autism and Neurospicy love. And also some self-care, like I've rediscovered yoga, and just trying to take care of myself, so it's really kind of it used to be quite a roller coaster with huge ups and downs, and now it's more of like a little kiddie roller coaster that you'd see at the local fair. That's a little rickety sometimes, but it's not so scary.
Yeah, no, I get that. What does a bad day look like?
A bad day could be when Darren and I are not doing a great job of communicating, and we have words with each other. And in fact, we had a bad day a couple of weeks ago, and this is actually why I thought maybe we shouldn't continue watching the show that I had mentioned. He went off to work, and I went off to my work, and we didn't talk through it. And it ended up being a big misunderstanding. So I will preach communication and how important it is, but we didn't make time to properly communicate with each other, and we let the emotions get better of us. And so those days are relatively few and far between. We're both conflict avoiders, and we always have been. And so we really don't have a lot of conflict, but when we do, communication could be better, and so I just really work toward that, and I think he does as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So I'm curious, what do you wish your younger self knew that you know today?
I wish I knew what autism spectrum disorder was, like the kids do now. I sound like I'm 80 saying that, like the kids do now. I wish that was something, get off my lawn. I wish that was something that we knew more about when I was in grade school, in middle school, and in high school. I think there would be so much more acceptance now, but it also would have saved me a lot of heartache personally. With my husband, we would not have had so many of the challenges and the heartache that we and I have had over the years. It just wouldn't have been, because I would know what it was. And also family issues. I would not have taken some things personally that I did take very personally. Gosh, it just would be great to know. I'm so glad that kids and adults know and are continuing to know more about autism and all of the the complications and the joys that encompass it much better than we used to.
Yeah, totally. And I think the joy thing we don't talk about enough, right? I imagine that if your husband is anything like me, he has some deep special interests where he is like probably one of the world's foremost experts on this thing by virtue of just doubling down on it, right? And the amount of joy you can get from something like that is extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I love, just even if it's not a special interest, like for him at least, there's a lot of research that goes into most things. And in fact, one quick example, so it's super cold here in Wisconsin right now, as I mentioned, and there are the gift this year is heated vests and coats, and and I have a heated insert for a coat that I had a few years ago when I was sitting on soccer sidelines, and it's clunky and it doesn't work real well in the coats. Well, now they have the whole coat is a heated coat or a vest. And so I had mentioned to him that it'd be great if Santa brought it, and then of course all the Cyber Mondays and the Black Friday deals are inundating our inboxes, and so one came up for these heated devices, and who says that your phone and your computer aren't listening to you, right? And so I sent it to him, and I said, I don't know if you've purchased something yet, but here are a couple that if you haven't, I may look into. And he's like, well, he goes, I have seen these, and these two where the heating panels are not as desirable by folks. Like he already dove right into it, and he's done all the research where I don't have to. And so so even though that's not his special interest, it's really nice that he's already done quite a dive into even heated coats, which he would never need to wear ever because he runs hot.
But the beautiful thing is that is him showing love for you, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Love and care and wanting you to be comfortable and happy. Cher, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I love it, and I can't wait to share this with our listeners.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. It's really been fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. You can find us on TikTok on Autistic FM, on Instagram at autistic_FM, and on the web on autistic.fm. On our website, you can also find a link to our newsletter, which I send out whenever we do a new episode, with some additional resources and news from across the world of neurospiciness. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haje Camps. If you know anybody who would be a great guest on the podcast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can email us on hello@autistic.fm or reach out via the socials. See you next week.